In Houston, I'm John Herder. Thursday today, July 16th. Great as always to have you guys along. Learn from the experts. LFTE is a cross-industry network that gives you 30-minute dose of real, hard-to-get business intelligence and connects you to new professionals and networks. So what's in it for you? Well, the LFTE promise. If all goes well, your curiosity is sparked, new ideas come to light, and you may have helped the other person solve a problem or reach their opportunity faster. Networking, as we all know, has never been more important for our business. So please help me, everyone, welcome our guest expert, Tej Bhatia. A little bit about him. Tej currently leads the external go-to-market strategy for the Office of the CIO at Google. He joined Google in 2018, startup ecosystems manager out of New York. His entire career basically has been in digital, launching ESPN3, co-founding and leading 3 startups, and working as entrepreneur in residence at City Ventures are just a few of the highlights of his career so far. Check it out on LinkedIn. So Tej, I'm so glad that you could make time for us this morning. Tell us just a little bit about your story and what's going on in your world.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Hello, everyone. I guess good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So my story in a nutshell is I'm born, raised in New York, studied computer science at Columbia here in New York. And then my career, I see, it's 3 chapters, but really it's the intersection of large corporate experience and startup experience. I got my start at ESPN. As you mentioned, on the digital side, I was in product management and then moved into international business strategy. Got the bug to go become an entrepreneur, did 10 years as a startup founder, 3 investor-backed companies. And, one exited, 1 failed, and 1 is in operation, still in operation and profitable. And then I had my son 4 years ago, which I don't want to say flipped any sort of switch. I still feel very entrepreneurial, but security and long-term safety and resources became important to me.
Both that works.
Yeah, and that's when I joined Citibank, which was a big cultural shift from startup world to one of the oldest, largest companies. And then I joined Google 2 years ago, which is also one of the largest companies, but not as old.
Well, we're interested in hearing about what's happening right now. What have you been experiencing lately at Google?
Yeah, so as of April 6th, I moved into the Office of the Chief Information Officer. And my role is specifically around capturing and sharing our thought leadership around our corona response, experience with work from home and productivity and well-being, and the eventual return to office, but more importantly, reimagining what work will be like for the next 50 years. That's not at all where I started within Google. I started on the startup side. As you mentioned, I was startup ecosystem manager for Google Cloud, working with the startup community globally, but primarily here in New York. I made it down to Houston a few times as well.
So you're on your journey. So in these last weeks, can you share with us, you have some comments that you'd like to share with us on what you've been seeing? And when we talked the first time, it was about this transition and then into what your passion is around ecosystems.
Yeah, so for me, one of the big things I've seen in the last couple of months, and it was the reason I took this job, this new role, it was a hypothesis I had, which is turned out to be very true. And I'll talk about it a little bit in the presentation, but literally nobody in the world that we know has experienced this before. Maybe 1 or 2 people went through the 1918 pandemic, but I doubt they were in our shoes back then, where they worked. They're probably too old. But so it's the first time all of us are experiencing this, yet every single person in the world can relate to it.
Yeah.
And that's been the biggest hypothesis that's been validated, which is a lot of the problems we're facing right now are near universal. So people look to Google and say, hey, you guys are, providing leadership on a technical front. But when this hit, again, nobody knew what to do. And I think a lot of things that Google did over the last 2 decades really prepared us to do this well.
Right.
But like with any organization, you just had to figure it out.
Right on. Okay. What do you want to share with us with regards to the details of what you're up to? Your
Do you want me to
Yeah, go for it. Go ahead and just share what we had talked about.
Also, I will share my screen with you folks. This is, just give me the heads up when you see it. You see it?
Yeah, we got it.
Let me go to present mode. No.
And then you can blow that up, I believe.
Do you see it in full screen?
Not yet. Can you guys see it? Everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Full
so
screen.
move on.
Okay, great. So this talk, which we're calling COVID and the Future of Ecosystems, is literally the mashup of two other talks. I say, the opinions here are my own, but the two talks are approved, and we've given them many times externally out to large communities, but also one-on-one with C-levels at Fortune 500 companies. And I'll point out when the actual mashup of the two presentations happen. So as I give you my background, my primary focus right now is leading our thought leadership strategy around COVID-19 response, work from home, and the eventual return. The 2 years before that was around ecosystem management, which I will talk about a lot here, which is a new and emerging practice that I was very happy about defining for the industry. And we'll get into that right now. So the origins of this talk were from a blog post I wrote last year. I can share it with you, the links below. It's called What is an Ecosystem Manager? So what I was trying to do was capture all the learnings around my role as an ecosystem manager at Google into a single manifesto for what this practice could be. And the title was literally, What is an Ecosystem Manager? And the subtitle was, I don't know yet. And it was part clickbait, because when you actually share it on LinkedIn or whatever, you see that right below, and it was kind of cheeky. But more importantly, it was that it's an emerging practice. It's something new. And I went into details about the efforts we took, the experiments we ran at Google globally, and what it could mean as an actual essential business function for an organization moving forward. And around that time, Omar, I don't know if he's on this call right now, but many of you may have interacted with him. That's actually how John and I met, reached out to me and told me about this conference that he's hosting called Ecosystems 2030. And the way he described it to me is every year we'll meet and we'll talk about another ecosystem for the next decade. But the first inaugural year, 2020, is literally about ecosystems as a whole. And he called me and said, hey, would you want to talk or do a workshop based on this blog post you put out? So it was extremely validating for me that this is, on a broader industry level, and someone like Omar is bringing together, really phenomenal people from around the world to talk about this, that, we're onto something. And I've been doing this work, and the tactics of it were proving to bear fruit for Google. And I was really excited. The initial conference was supposed to be in Spain in June, this past June. It got postponed until September. And I know he's doing a webinar, which I believe all of us are invited to.
That's right. Today. By the way, really pleased to be a partner with Ecosystems 2030. And just a pitch for them, their webinar is it's free, and it's on Monday, the 20th. Thanks, Tej. All right.
Can you hear me okay, John?
Yep, got you.
Okay, cool. Sorry. So then, really, really excited about this conference and opportunity. Then Corona hit. So we're talking, February, March for me when the transition for work happened. And now this is the point in the presentation that you'll see the mashup of the second presentation. This is what I've been talking about daily for the last couple of months. As I mentioned, this is an unprecedented situation. No one we know has had to deal with it, yet every single person on the planet can relate. And what I want to talk to you about today is what Google had to do and what lessons we learned over the last several months. So the first thing we did when we saw that this was going to be a global situation, obviously we saw what was going on in Asia and started preparing. Our top priority, which is still our top priority, is the safety of Googlers and the well-being of our community, the expanded community. And for my team, that internally is known as Corp-Eng, corporate engineering, sort of equivalent to enterprise IT at other organizations. We think about things a little differently at Google, but roughly that function it became front and center for us. And I think this is true across all organizations. The CIO, the Chief Information Officer, now plays such a pivotal role given the future as we see it. And for our team, that meant getting Googlers home, getting them equipped, getting them connected, and getting them secure. There's a lot of challenges here. Well over 100,000 people who had to go work from home overnight. Many of those people did not have the equipment or access they needed at home, in some cases because their roles were designed to work in the office. And in other cases, they might not even have had internet connection at home. And then third, the supply chain was broken. We all saw that, not just shipping and logistics, but even commercial travel, thinking that you might be able to send some laptops, in a suitcase. Couldn't even do that. So these were all challenges we faced. I won't go into tons of detail on the challenges, but I'll talk about the lessons we learned. One of the biggest lessons I would take away from the entire experience is this first one. Priority was keeping the workforce informed. So now you've got well over 100,000 people. You can't rely on the fact that a long email is going out from security or facilities to say, hey, everyone get home. This is serious. So what we did was we paired our communications folks with our marketing and user experience folks. And we treated all our communications, internal communications, not as a word-by-word press release or way other things are treated, but more of, hey, most important thing is that the message reaches everyone. It's extremely urgent and it's high priority. So let's do an omni-channel, data-driven, again, a marketing-focused effort to make sure every single one of our people knows what they need to do. And the second, like I mentioned, it's very clear. Despite whatever politics or contracting we had to do because we can't travel across borders, we are one interconnected global supply chain that can break, and it did break. So we can't do anything alone. So we learned that partnering with our vendors was a big game changer for us when it came to getting things done in a broken supply chain. Once we had everyone home and safe, we shifted into fostering community, health, happiness, productivity, and culture from home. We're still in this phase right now, and we're still learning the lessons. A couple of interesting lessons that came out of it. One is new technologies like artificial intelligence came in extremely handy when it came to monitoring the problem. And you may think of Google and think of artificial intelligence, and the tools we had, we were developing long before the pandemic. But a specific tool from an enterprise IT standpoint that we had is, people create support tickets, they have, their computer breaks, they can't connect. We started years ago analyzing and clustering that data in a hope to prevent problems before they even happen. And what happened with that tool when Corona hit is we could see in near real time blockers that were preventing people from getting home safe and connected. And that tool was extremely valuable. Second, a lot of the partners we work with, whether these be governments, other enterprises, institutions, they want to learn about productivity. And productivity is very hard to measure regardless of the current situation. It's a debate, especially on an engineering level, that we could have for hours. But one thing we quickly learned is activity does not equal productivity. You might actually see that people are working more, there's no commute. And again, it's just my opinion, but sometimes that's also a coping mechanism. Hyperactivity and working is a way to distract yourself. And we're all going through very challenging times right now, whether you're caring for older parents or young children, or you're alone. Everyone is dealing with this differently. So we've taken a very holistic approach when we think about productivity, which is both activity and well-being. Activity you can measure quantitatively, well-being is a little harder, but we've been working on that. And now, as we shift to this next stage, we re-envision kind of what the distributed workplace of the future is. And I don't actually talk about lessons learned here because we're still working on it. But I'll mention some of the challenges. And these are the ones where I think are near universal. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the safety and well-being of Googlers and the community remains our top priority. The return to office will be slow, deliberate, and incremental. Everyone needs to feel safe. So in the short term, it's return to office. The priorities are health, safety, social distancing. Once we solve that, then we have to look at the work environment very differently. We already knew there was challenges with access and equity when, let's say 5 people on a team are in a conference room together and 2 people are at home. Social cues, just being in the room together, being with management or whatever, actually plays a big impact in that equity. So we're really thinking about how we treat a culture that will either be, completely distributed or, probably majority distributed, if not partially. And then ultimately, the goal here is not just to get back to where we were before with some proxies. It's actually to make this even better. Yes, this is challenges and there are new constraints that didn't exist before, but we have an opportunity to go back to the drawing board and really re-envision the right way for future generations to work. So this is now the mashup back to the previous part of the talk, which is about ecosystem management. So in light of the coronavirus and the pandemic, what's still true about ecosystem management? So a lot of this talk was actually created before Corona hit, once Omar reached out to me to talk at the conference. So a few things are still true. I think the role of an ecosystem manager is to be an ambassador for their brand out to a community and an advocate for that community inside their organization. So for me, that was being an ambassador for Google out to the startup community and being an advocate for startups inside Google. The objective of an ecosystem manager is to achieve a meaningful business goal. For me, that was revenue, sales pipeline, and actual revenue into the company in 2 to 4 years by doing the essence of what an ecosystem manager does: galvanize communities, both external, internal, basically what John is doing with this organization right now. It's not a sales role, meaning it's not quarter by quarter and you're not quota driven, nor is it investment. You're not planting seeds that you're hoping to see a return in 10 years. You're not picking winners. When you meet 1,000 people, you can actually help all 1,000 of them. And I use this term in the blog post called full stack ecosystem management, which means providing value to the entire ecosystem. So for startups, it meant the founders, it meant the venture capitalists, the investors, the capital sources that fund the venture capitalists, and all the support systems, governments, universities, enterprises. So what's no longer true? Most of my job was in person. And
ouch, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And John and I talked a lot about this yesterday. Zoom is not a good enough proxy for me. I get very tired. It doesn't give me an energy the way it does being in a one-on-one situation, one-to-many situation, or many-to-many situation. So that's not here. Second, serendipity. If we were all meeting in person, I'm sure, random talks would be happening, conversations, we'd hear something and connections would be made. There are startups that are doing some interesting stuff to recreate that, but again, not the same, especially not in a place like New York where walking down the street, you run into people often. Budgets have shifted. There's no point in spending money on large conferences and travel. And in general, this in real life, grabbing a meal with someone, a drink with someone, traveling around the world to hang out is just not the case right now. So given that, what is the future of ecosystems? And I think it comes down to a simple conditional that's actually not that simple. On the short term, it depends on a vaccine or immunity. So if a vaccine comes, the question is when, right? And if you're extremely optimistic that it's coming this year, great. Well, it's going to take time to develop, distribute, administer. So when is that moment where we can all feel safe where everyone can feel safe to come back? And then second, if there is no vaccine, then what do we do? And that's a much bigger question. And that leads me to that long-term opportunity that this is a really great opportunity in time. We should be solving for that anyway. How do we make this better? How how do we create more opportunity from this? And I heard a great quote. I attribute it to just somebody here because I couldn't find the actual quote, but I believe it was the mayor of Venice. And someone had asked the mayor, what are you going to do now? You know, tourism has stopped. Your economy is, really hurting. And the mayor said something effective, you know, before 2020 started, we got our experts together to create a plan for 2030. And that would be sustainable, green, you know, economically viable for residents and tourists. And there's no point in incrementing it and waiting till 2030. We'll just do it now. You know, the streets are empty, we can make it. And I thought it really reminded me a lot of the conference, Ecosystems 2030, but I just also loved that thinking that was, we don't have to wait. This is an actual opportunity to do that. So John, I know I'm running a little over time, so this was a slide that I had created before the pandemic. And these are ecosystems that I feel are ripe for ecosystem management. Cloud is the area that I'm in right now. And it worked really well for that. The next area I think is artificial intelligence. And what's common across all these is they've been around for a while. They are the technology of tomorrow, but they're also here and now. So I think artificial intelligence can be an area where an ecosystem manager can make a significant impact on an organization, being an ambassador out to the community for that organization. The next is autonomy, whether this be autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, shipping and logistics, all built on AI. And like I said, this was before the pandemic. I had put outer space because it's a passion area of mine. But I realized that given the pandemic, the opportunities now exist for, you know, inner space, our health, outer space, the cosmos, and then office space. What are we going to do with all this real estate coming back? And I think anybody working in those areas really has an opportunity. And I'll just end with, you know, all of us collectively have a responsibility and an opportunity to return better and stronger than before, and we can do it together and make it better for generations to come.
Thanks. Say, about this office space, can you give a couple of things that you guys, as you're looking at re-officing, we talk about this a lot on Learn from the Experts. From your side, what are a couple of those things that you're working on that you see are most important to actually, what does the office look like? Well, how would that happen?
Yeah, so one thing we're doing is thinking of the entire journey that an employee would go through, right? And that starts leaving home, your commute, your entrance into the building, your path to your desk, and then your use of the office and the services during the day. And I think for the short term, that's going to be very limited, very focused on the short-term priorities of social distancing and safety. Long term, I think it's going to be a combination of, you know, having a great work from home environment experience and having an even better experience in the office, and then utilizing different technologies to make sure we continue to be safe.
Can you give any examples of things that, you know, whether it's a technology or a method that y'all are looking at in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I mean, from a technology, I think you're going to see this, and this is just not just us, but you're going to see this sensor technology, Internet of Things, whether that be for contact tracing, whether that be for maintaining distance. You're going to see a lot more in-office technology, whether that be smart devices, old devices like badge readers that can now take on more responsibility, and doing it in a way that is safe and secure and private, and takes into account, you know, local guidelines, whatever the current situation is, whatever monitoring is happening, whatever your organization has put in place for business continuity. You'll see that going from, you know, the highest strategic levels, you know, of your leadership down to very tactical uses of data that haven't been used before.
Oh, nice. So folks, got any questions? Pipe up now. Go ahead and give them on over to Tej. I see that Bernardo sent something in about regarding workforce as getting accustomed to working from home, what lessons you have to maintain increased worker productivity. Do you have anything in particular to add to that?
Yeah. So like I said, this is one of the biggest questions we get. So in my role, I along with the leadership of the company, meet with leadership of other companies. And as I mentioned, productivity is very hard to measure regardless, but I think well-being is an important element of that. We do it through surveys. We've been doing this for a while, so we have longitudinal data to benchmark it against. But as you can imagine, perceived productivity for people, especially type A hard workers, is also depending on their situation. If they're, John, you're going to be homeschooling for the next, couple of months, it has a major impact. What's interesting, I like about this question, which I think is very important, is the last part, especially in regards to leadership. So everything you saw in this presentation and everything everyone is talking about right now is the community, the culture, employees, your colleagues. What about managers? And I think at Google, the philosophy and the approach is different than some, older and legacy Fortune 500 companies. So I'll give you an example of my previous employer, Citibank, or just banks in general. There's a certain culture when it comes to management and leadership and how you move up. And I'm sure that's even within the financial industry, it's different company to company, but oil and gas is probably different. Education is probably different, whatever your market is. And I think the challenge that I think a lot of top leadership see is like, okay, we do all this amazing work to improve collaboration and increase productivity and make people feel great, but then your managers come back or your leaders come back and they don't change their behavior. And it becomes very supervisory. It becomes very, like not psychologically safe, which doesn't align with all this hard work we've done. The way I see it is almost a flip of that. I think it's an opportunity now to retrain leadership about this. And the first thing, something we're doing is, managers need to be trained on, mental health and well-being, and being able to check in with people to make sure they're okay and support them in ways that they didn't have to be before.
I don't know about you, but I've seen different types of online tools or services, right, that I have not seen before for psychological support and things like that. So any other questions for Tej?
So Scott just put one on.
Okay.
So I'll read out one thing we're seeing both with adults and children with homeschooling is that many are not adapting as well. How are you addressing this human behavioral issue to bring these folks along faster? So it's interesting. I mean, I can give you firsthand experience from my child's perspective. My son actually did pick up Zoom pretty well. He's only 4. But I know his classmates, many have hardcore rejected it. And there can be any reasons, contextual reasons for it. And all of a sudden, that is a skills gap, right? Being good at Zoom is a thing. And John and I were joking yesterday. Like I said, I'm an extrovert, and I learned this very clearly in my role, and I'm as an ecosystem manager, and I'm learning it very clearly during shelter in place that Zoom is not giving me that energy, and it's hurting me. I feel depleted. And someone had asked me a similar question in a joke in a previous talk, and I made a joke that what's a skill that makes you better working from home? And I said lighting. Like having your environment actually look better makes the other person feel less tired. And I say this as a half joke because there are other things you can do that you would never have even thought about. If your entire day is through a computer screen, first of all, your own comfort, your home environment. I've seen people rent Airbnbs 2 houses down, like an apartment over someone's garage, because they simply just need to get to another office. I've seen, people, I think, the age of the child matters as well. Like children are becoming a lot more independent, at least the older ones that can do all this. So, within Google, it's a lot of understanding everyone's situation, and no two situations are alike.
So we've got a second one here. Nikki says, what are the main areas Google is investing in innovation right now that provide new methods and better tools for working together remotely?
Yeah, so I'll just clarify the word investing. So what I'm talking about right now is more thinking about innovation. I can't really speak to where we're putting money behind it, but some of the really interesting things I've seen. And so I touched upon John's question about going back to the office and like how we look at the entire journey from the commute to the office services. Another thing, so if you take that same journey but pre-pandemic times, what you realize is there's a lot of ambient information you get when you're not working but going to the office, literally the elevator ride, saying good morning to the security staff, even badging in and seeing how the line is that morning, and your own day, like dropping your kid off took a little longer this morning. There's a lot of information you get for yourself and your team, and you share, literally at the water cooler, oh man, hit so much traffic this morning, whatever. So, I'm in a little frazzled moment this morning. Give me an hour before you talk to me. We don't have that kind of information when we're all sitting at home. We also have other weird information, looking into each other's homes. That's new for all of us. So trying to recreate that ambient information, whether it be a second screen where, your team can check in, you can see who's busy, who's having, who's not, who's in the flow, who's not. We can also pop up other information that might show up on a closed circuit screen in your office. Those are kind of the interesting areas that I'm seeing. And those could actually work in a return as well. Imagine every work area has your laptop plus another, smart device that's a touchscreen that really is not intended to be hyper interactive with, but it's just giving you information on your team that's highly distributed.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and move on from there. Tej, thanks so much. And obviously we want you to hang out as we go into the next piece, which is the networking part, leads and needs. So what we know is more trust equals richer network, right? Everything that we experiment in this part of the show, there are two parts, the expert and then the networking, is about building confidence and trust with each other to help each other out to get to our opportunities faster. So I sent out a couple of questions, discussion questions to the group to help us compare notes and share experiences and observations. So I'm going to open the floor and I'd ask you to choose one and jump in. So they're bright spots. First question is, hey, what clever innovation have you experienced or seen in your community that makes people's lives just a little bit better these days? And then the second one is around lessons learned. And this is a little more serious. It's like, hey, what went wrong? What did not work? And, everybody's adapting and they would benefit from being aware of the potholes that you've already encountered on the road. So anybody feel like jumping in on bright spots or lessons learned in this particular time we're in? I'll give an example around a bright spot. In my neighborhood, we have this store that, it's another grocery store. It's okay, but it's not the big one in the neighborhood. But what they did is they bought a San Francisco style mechanical trolley, motor trolley. And what they did is they created an app, and so you can actually order from them, and they'll wheel this huge trolley out to your neighborhood. And the trolley will also stop spontaneously if you're on the street and you wave them down. They'll let just one person come in at a time because of the COVID rules. And the trolley's bell, you can hear it coming. It's a ding, ding, just little things like that. Just made life just a little bit better and a little bit easier. So I thought that was pretty clever. That's my example.
Well, John, since you gave a innovation or good example, I'll give the lesson learned, if you will. I'll switch to the other side. And strangely, it's not that far off of some of what Tej was describing with what they went through at Google. So we're obviously a much smaller company than Google, at 100 and something odd employees in a small, 90-year-old private family-owned company. And when this all hit, what was it here in Houston, maybe around mid-March, right around spring break-ish, all of a sudden everything shut down. None of the kids are going back to school. So we immediately sent out anyone that was an office worker to the home office environment. And we were set up nicely with some remote desktop capabilities and things like that, because we had some folks that would work, every Friday or every other Friday at home, and a few of us that are just the evil sales guys that work from the home office on a pretty regular basis. We're used to doing that. But we learned very quickly that our VPN was not set up in order to support having 40 or 50 people logged in at the same time, as opposed to just say half a dozen or so on a given day. And what it boiled down to, and a lot of folks have the same issue, or at least the same setup with their home internet, in that you get a huge downstream capability and bandwidth, but your upstream is typically very small. And our site holds all our own servers at our little headquarters in Deer Park, Texas. And thus, when everyone's logging in, trying to get to that database to do their ERP work, and whether it's project management or creating a quote or entering an order, whatever it might be, everyone's trying to hit it at the same time, and our server couldn't get out fast enough. And so it just started booting people off the VPN in order to try and free itself up. And so we learned pretty quickly that those of us that didn't need to be on the VPN from 8 to 5, we needed to get off the VPN from 8 to 5. And we could do our stuff at night or earlier in the morning. And strangely, as I speak right now, we're in the middle of a 4 or 5 week upgrade of that upstream, whatever it is. I'm assuming it's fiber connection to the curb or something like that. But we're upgrading that bandwidth right now. But while we're upgrading it, we had to move 90% of those people back into the office.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and that all happens to coincide with this, quote unquote spike in Texas.
Yeah.
Which is really just, 3 times as many people getting tested, but it looks terrible in the numbers. But, it was something we didn't plan for. We took all our IT stuff in-house to have more control over it and be more productive on a daily basis. But no one had ever planned for, oh crap, what happens if we kick 50 people out of the office to the house? And that hit pretty quick. That was, so, could it have been avoided? No, not in time. We couldn't have upgraded all of our bandwidth capabilities in the 1 week or 3 days or whatever notice was given to move people out of the office. But maybe we could have planned a little better had we expected it.
Got it.
Jason, you're not alone. I mean, fortunately, Google is not a VPN dependent company, so it's a lot easier for us. There's a few other slides in that in the mashup. I took a bunch out, but even large enterprises had that same exact VPN problem, because VPNs are not designed for that scale or to actually be interoperable if you need hit 2 different databases. So it is a very common problem. But I think by solving it, hopefully there won't be a next time this happens, but you'll be prepared for it.
John, I might make a comment as well.
Go for it.
Yeah, as you know, I've spent most of my career looking at engineering and scientific data, the so-called digital oil field and IoT and that sort of thing. At conferences last November, it was all the rage and it was going to hit us, and we had to do it. I think one of the lessons from this COVID is the quality of the data sucks. Apparently in Florida, they're counting the same person multiple times as they continue to test positive, as opposed to control for the person and not for the test. And different models are spewing out erroneous information, et cetera. Validity and reliability are not well established. So I think the lesson here, as we move towards a world where we are largely dependent on data, sensor information, and analysis to make decisions, and the human ultimately will make most of the decisions, I guess, until the robots take over, that the lesson here is that we've got to do a better job managing data.
Lewis, do you have any experience like that you've been facing with some of your supply chain? Figured I'd pitch that to you. Let's see, John Lewis.
I didn't know which Lewis you're talking to.
So there's only one, it's you.
We actually, the connectivity for us has been pretty good from a space business standpoint. We actually in February started say, hey, people go home and actually start trying out VPN, trying out that connectivity. For me, my change has primarily been, I just changed my office space from, an old government building to a house, a home. It is interesting and different because most of our communications, we're used to talking to slides and not looking at faces. And so primarily, I'm still looking at a lot of slides, but it's, I think I'm finding a lot of my team, which is a broad spectrum of, I've got some millennials all the way to guys that can tell you Apollo stories because they saw it firsthand. And they're learning how, okay, that's how I get a video chat going, on this application. And so it's been a fairly good adjustment, and we're, I mean, still pressing forward. I haven't actually, I'm quite surprised, especially a lot of my manufacturing is in Northeast, that we didn't get affected by any of the COVID outbreaks. So it's been I'm surprised how smoothly it's gone, quite actually.
Mm. But another aspect that I've seen, so I'm based in London, and of course financial center, and a lot of my friends and work in the financial industry, and it brings up the question of security, because there are still so many companies. Of course, I work in a startup doing innovation and IP services, but or in intellectual property services. So I'm not touched by this, but these people have been having to go to work. So they've put up rosters where they have to go to work in order to access their systems, and therefore they don't have an option. So they've got frame for the banking and financial industry. Still, a lot of stuff is running on systems where you have to be physically located there. They put up rosters where they have rotation of certain people going into the office every now and then. And it'd be interesting to know how many industries are still like that, where they actually cannot because of security risks, and what we can do about that in the future, so we can build robust systems that are secure over the internet. You don't need to be on your closed loop system.
Well, let's swing back to a bright spot. You know, and I talked earlier about one of my colleagues was needing some psychological support, and she said her company was making that available through, I can't remember the name of the service now, but online. So that's another example of a really kind of a classic service, but made much more accessible. Anybody else have a bright spot like that? Andrew?
So I had been doing Pilates, months and months ago at a studio at our place in Palm Springs. So my husband and I split our time between Seattle and Palm Springs, and just fell in love with it. Our community where we lived had these amazing reformers, and I had never done the reformers before, but they were so cool. And then the pandemic hit, and so I'd gone, a week or two without Pilates. I was climbing walls because it just became such a part of my day. And so this went on for, a couple of weeks. And so I called my Pilates instructor and I said, hey, I have an idea. I said, I have a Zoom, subscription. I use it for work. What if we did virtual Pilates? I said, I don't have a reformer, but I know that, I've got all the toys. I have the bands, the ring, the styrofoam roller, the weights. I have all that, the props. He said, sure, let's give that a try. And so we've been doing that now for, I don't know, close to 6 months, twice a week. And I'm in the best shape of my life. I think I'm in better shape now than I was when we did the reformers. It's actually harder, especially if you have a few extra pounds like I do, because Pilates is all about resistance and your own body weight.
So
and I'm carrying some extra weight because I have that much more resistance when I'm, using my own body for the resistance.
Right.
So that's just been huge, and it's just a private, one-on-one class, and I get a ton out of it. He can see me, I can see him, and so for my my well-being and my stress and just all of that, it's something I look forward to twice a week, and it just made a huge difference. So that was just adapting. What you would think would only be an in-person type of activity, to then just getting creative and saying, well, how could we do this virtually?
Permanently change your behavior. Will you go back to the studio or just keep doing it this way?
Well, so the other cool thing, yeah. So the other, bright spot in all of this is that I was dreading going back to Seattle, because I thought, oh, great, now I got to find a new instructor. I've got to find a new studio. Well, I haven't done that. I couldn't if I wanted to. They're all closed. But so I'm able to do the virtual Pilates regardless of, if we're in Seattle, or I could be anywhere in the world and do it. So I've not been motivated to try to find another studio. And even when things return to normal, I don't plan to. I'll probably go back to doing reformers in Palm Springs, but in Seattle, I think I'll keep working with my instructor virtually. I mean, I would rather do that than try to find another studio.
Cool. Well, folks, that's all we have for time today. So I'll be sending out a 3-question survey a little bit later. How do we make this show better? We need your feedback. Do you or someone you know have a challenge or topic that you'd like to bring to the show? Let me know. Be sure also to connect with each other and with the LFTE LinkedIn discussion group. While you're there, check out Ecosystems 2030, our partner. They have this free webinar that's happening on Monday. It should be neat. Tej, thanks once again. Really appreciated your comments, and I personally enjoyed getting to know you a little bit, and I hope you keep joining us into the future.
Thank you for having me.
That's the end of the show, folks. I hope this was the smartest 45 minutes of your day. Take care.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.